Hi guys, it's Jess from Honest Fiction, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I am going to be sharing my February wrap-up. Alright guys, so time for some real talk. I read 8.5 books in February, and I'm very excited to talk about them with you guys. However, I was feeling a little bit discouraged when I was putting this video together because I typically read between 15 and 20 books a month, or at least I did last year. However, that is no longer possible. I just do not have enough time to keep up my full-time job, also run my Patreon. Also, I have a second job that I don't talk about very often. Also make YouTube videos, and then also actually have a personal life and spend time with my husband and my friends. So realistically, my wrap-ups are probably going to be between 10 and 12 books a month. So I'm really sorry about that. If you come to my wrap-ups looking for a lot of book recommendations, I just can't feasibly keep it up. So I no longer feel upset about that. I was actually watching another content creator. It was Tori from Novel Life, and she was talking about how towards the end of last year, she felt like she was reading books just to finish them, and I felt very, very similarly last month. I felt like I was pushing through books that I might actually really enjoy just so I can keep my number up and move to the next book, and that's just not healthy, and it's also going to cause a lot of burnout. So I have decided just to embrace reading a few books a month. Honestly, that's just what works for me. So I'm really sorry if you come to my wrap-ups wanting a bunch of recs. That probably isn't going to be happening unless something happens and I get a lot more time. But anyway, I'm very excited to talk about these books with you guys. And if you're unfamiliar with my channel, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. You can also hit that notification bell to be notified whenever I post new bookish content. You can also check out my Instagram, Goodreads, and Patreon, all linked down below. With all that out of the way, let's talk about the books I read in February. Alright guys, so starting off with fantasy romance. First up, we have Crescent City 3, House of Flame and Shadow. This is the third book in the Crescent City series. Now, I am going to try to keep this review as spoiler-free as possible. However, if you do not want to know anything, including my rating, please jump to the next timestamp now, just because I'm going to try my best, but I don't know what's considered a spoiler to some people. Like, there are certain plot elements that I wouldn't consider a spoiler, but they might be. So just know that. You can skip to the next timestamp. However, I will do my best. I ended up rating this 3.75. I still haven't really fully come up with my thoughts surrounding this book. I did film a review that is just sitting on my computer waiting to be edited. I don't know if I'm ever even going to edit it. I just felt very underwhelmed by this book. I wanted to love it. However, I just didn't have the magic, or I didn't feel the magic that I felt when I read ACOTAR and Throne of Glass for the first time. And something that really put it into perspective was at the end of this book, there is an event that takes place that makes you very worried for a character, and I could care less if that character died. Which means I'm not as attached to that character as I'm attached to, let's say, Rhysand or Farah or any of the characters from ACOTAR. Like, pretty much any of these characters could have passed away in this book, and I wouldn't have been that upset about it, except for two side characters, and they were my favorite part of this entire book. There are two side characters that I just feel really carried the book for me, and I wanted more of them, and instead we got Bryce and Hunt, and unfortunately, I don't like Bryce and Hunt as the characters that we follow. I hate Hunt as a love interest overall, just not for me. And then Bryce, I just feel like isn't as fleshed out as I would like. Like, sometimes she comes off as being this amazing problem solver that's keeping all of these secrets from everybody else, and then other times not so much. So I don't know. I just didn't love this, and I wanted to. I also wanted a lot more of that crossover, and I feel like we really didn't get as much of that as not we were promised by SJM, but it seemed like that's what we were leading up to, especially with the teasers that Sarah released. I really thought the crossover was going to be a bigger portion of this book, and it was just really let down by that. So overall, I wanted to love this. Obviously, 3.75 is not a terrible rating. Like, there were parts of this I really, really enjoyed, and I love Sarah J. Maas's writing. It's just overall, I wanted to love this so much more than I did. So hopefully the next ACOTAR book, ACOTAR 4, is going to be amazing. However, I haven't loved really any SJM book since the last Throne of Glass book. I liked A Kingdom or A Court of Silver Flames. I think I ended up rating that also 3.75. But A Court of Frost and Starlight I hated, and House of Sky and Breath, I despised that book. And then Crescent City I liked, but the first half was a little bit info dumpy, but I love the second half of that book, which is why I've been continuing with the series. So overall, I don't know if I'll read the fourth Crescent City book. If it does follow those side characters, then maybe. But let me know what you guys think. Did you love this, or were you just kind of underwhelmed like me? And luckily, the next fantasy romance book I read was a 5-star read. So we have Slaying the Vampire Conqueror, and this is by Carissa Broadbent. So this is in the same world as the Crowd of Nyaxia series. However, I do believe this can be read as a standalone. And this was so good, and it's exactly what I wanted the Elise Kovas series, Deal with the Elf King, and all of those books to be. This was just so fleshed out in terms of world building, politics, characters. All the characters were well developed. The romance was so good, and I loved everything about this book. So this is following a girl, her name's Selena, and she was an orphan. She ended up joining this almost like cult and had to give up her eyes to this goddess. But after doing this, she's able to see threads of fate. So it's almost like she has sight, but almost like an enhanced type of sight. And I just thought that was such an interesting and unique way of kind of like seeing the world. And then we have Atreus, who is this vampire conqueror, who she has to befriend, work for, and eventually kill, because that is what the cult has instructed her to do. And it's their romance, and I adored this book. So I highly recommend. I love this. I will say I did like Six Scorched Roses just a little bit more, but overall I am becoming one of the biggest Carissa Broadbent fans, which is really funny because I read Daughter of the Worlds 2 years ago, and I did not enjoy that book, but this book is so, so good. So highly recommend if you want a vampire fantasy romance, look no further. And moving into YA fantasy, first up we have Throne of Glass, which is the first book in the Throne of Glass series. So I am reading this as part of a read-along that is going on my Patreon. So every month, my patrons and I are reading one book from Throne of Glass until we finish, and so far I am really enjoying it. Now, the reason at the beginning of this video I said 8.5 books is because I have not finished my reread of this yet. I still have about 7 chapters left, and honestly, I forgot how young this first book feels. So if you're unfamiliar with Throne of Glass, we are following Selena Sardathian. At the start of this book, she is being taken to this kingdom where she is going to have to compete to the death in these trials, or not trials, in this like gladiator type tournament with other assassins and prisoners. And while all this is going on, there's a mystery and a plot happening inside this castle that she has to kind of uncover with the help of her friends. But overall, Throne of Glass is one of my favorite series I've ever read. It is so unbelievably epic, and the characters you will fall in love with. So I'm very excited to continue with this. I just forgot the tone of the first 2 books are so unbelievably young adult. But I swear, from what I remember, by the time you hit Heir of Fire, it starts to become a little bit more new adult. And then by the time you get to Kingdom of Ash, it feels very, very adult. Not in terms of spice, just in terms of like mature themes that are going on. But overall, I'm so happy to be part of this read-along. So definitely check this out and check out my Patreon if you haven't yet. And next up is Tempest of Tea, and this is a YA vampire fantasy romance that was influenced by Six of Crows and Peaky Blinders. And it is very, very reminiscent of Six of Crows. We are following these different points of view, and it is a gang that is working together to try to save this tea shop by doing a heist against these very powerful people. And I had a lot of trouble finishing this book, which is very upsetting because I was so excited to pick this up. I will say the second half is so much better than the first half, and I am one of those people that gets really annoyed when people say that, because obviously the first half of the book is setting up character development and like the world and the heist. However, when I think Six of Crows, I think of action and banter and things like that, and I feel like this book was lacking in both those areas. There just isn't a lot going on besides the character development for most of this book, and I feel like I just needed a little bit more. Also, the very end of this book has a big reveal that I'm still not sure how I feel about. I saw part of it coming, but the second half just felt like it came out of nowhere. Although there are clues given, it just felt so random. But overall, I did end up giving it, I think 3.5, 4 stars. The second half, so much better. Now, will I read the second book? I'm not exactly sure. This is a duology. I might have to reread the first book, and maybe I'll follow along with a physical book as I listen to the audiobook. That might have been a problem. It also might have just been a bad time for me to read this book. I don't know why. I just never felt really invested. So it might be a me thing. So if that plot sounds interesting to you, I would definitely give it a chance. Overall, it just didn't really work for me. And moving into dark romance. Now, I went down a dark romance rabbit hole in February. I fully intended to read mostly fantasy romance. However, I'm kind of okay with it because I read some amazing dark romance this month. And one of them is Serpentine, Valentine by Giana Darling. So this is her newest release. It is a dark academia sapphic romance, and I thoroughly enjoyed this book. We are following Lex, and after something very upsetting and terrible happens to her, she is out for revenge, and she decides that she is going to try to seduce the daughter of the headmaster at this school that she wants to take down. And through that, there ends up being a romance that blossoms, and this story goes from there. So I will say this does not have a lot of bully tropes in it. I thought this was going to be similar to Tris 6 Venom based on the synopsis, and different feel completely. I enjoyed this so much more, and I highly recommend. And of course, it's written by Giana Darling, so the writing is phenomenal, and I love this. So definitely check this out if you haven't yet. And next up was a 5-star read. I am so happy I picked this book up. Thank you so much, Cheyenne, from That Tall Book Girl, for putting this book on my radar. It is Debt by Nina G. Jones. This is the only book I've read so far from this author, but I will be reading so much more. So I saw Cheyenne posted about this book saying that she absolutely loved it. Everyone needed to read it. And I figured I would give it a chance. So I listened to the first few chapters, and I honestly thought this book was just going to be straight up dark smut, and that is totally okay. I just wasn't in the mood for it at the time. So then I started listening to it a few days later, and I finished the entire book and was just blown away. This book changes tone and is just a roller coaster of emotions, and it was so good. It was so good, but it's also so hard to summarize without giving away any sort of spoiler. So essentially, we are following this girl who decides to order a type of attack I don't know how to say this without getting demonetized, honestly. So there's this girl that ends up ordering something that she wants done to her that is very, very bad. And when someone comes to do that to her, she thinks it's who she ordered. And it turns out it's actually not. It was somebody who was stalking her, who she has a past with. And then she realizes that and has to kind of go from there after being blackmailed with what happened. And then the story goes from there. So check trigger warnings, but oh my gosh, I loved this book. I loved it so much. So once again, thank you so much, Cheyenne. I cannot wait to read more from this author. And next up for dark romance, I finally got around to reading Still Beating by Jennifer Hartmann. So I had picked up this book right when I started my booktube channel, so over 3 years ago. I think it was Jess from Peace Love Books was talking about it, and I wasn't reading dark romance yet. I was only reading fantasy romance, so that book was way too dark for me. However, since then, obviously, I've read a lot more dark romance. It's one of my favorite genres, so I wanted to give it another try, and oh wow, am I happy I did. I loved this book. So we're following these two people. One of them is this girl whose sister is about to marry this guy that she has been, I don't kind of want to say like frenemies. They have always been in each other's orbit, but they fight nonstop. So anyway, she's at this bar. She ends up calling her sister for a ride home. The boyfriend or fiance answers and begrudgingly agrees to pick her up. However, they both end up being abducted by a serial killer who tortures them, makes them do horrible things, and eventually, after they're able to escape, they have to kind of figure out what to do in the aftermath, and it completely derails both their lives, and this book was amazing. So definitely worth all of the hype. I loved it so, so much, and I cannot wait to read more from Jennifer Hartmann. I read most of her backlist, but there are a few out that haven't come out via audio, so as soon as those books drop, I will read them. And this last dark romance book, I'm gonna be honest, it was way too dark for me. Have you ever finished a book and then you were like, am I okay? Like, what possessed me to finish reading this entire book? So that book is along for the ride. Do with that information what you will. Check all of the trigger warnings. I think every trigger imaginable is in this book. We are following a girl who ends up meeting these two serial killers and just has some fun time with them. And things happen, and it's slightly horrifying and disturbing and unbelievably spicy. So just know that. Check all of the trigger warnings. This is probably the most messed up book I've ever read in my life. So there's that. But anyway, Didn't work for me, but maybe it'll work for you. And last up is actually a thriller. So I am very excited. I'm gonna get back into thrillers. I'm gonna try to read at least one thriller or historical fiction a month, just because I used to love them. And then I really started only reading fantasy romance, and I wanted to give thrillers and historical fictions another shot. So anyway, this is First Lie Wins, and at the start of the story, we see this girl, and we know that she's lying to everyone around her. We don't exactly know what she's lying about, but we know that she's creating this fake persona, and very shortly into the book, she ends up meeting someone who has her real name and seems to be a copy of her real life. And you're trying to uncover what is actually going on throughout the entirety of this book. Who is lying? Who is telling the truth? Who is in on this con? Who isn't? And it was interesting. I just wish it was a little bit more fleshed out. And I don't know, I just wanted a little bit more from it. It just felt like it was too many big reveals at the end. And I just wanted like one crazy thing that completely blew my mind instead of a bunch of like micro little things. But overall, it was okay. I think I ended up rating this 3 stars. But once again, I am so excited to read more thrillers in the future. All right, guys, those are all the books I read in February. Thank you so much for watching. And please let me know down in the comments below if you read any of the books I mentioned. And I'd also like to say a huge thank you to my Paladin protectors, Amanda and Erin and Leslie. Thank you guys so much for supporting my channel. And I said this already, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday, and if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. I will see you all next week. Bye!